Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow, moonlit walk along the coast of ancient Alexandria, a place where the sea hums softly against the shore, and the night smells faintly of ink, papyrus, and salt. You can almost hear it, the gentle murmur of the Mediterranean, whispering secrets that drifted through this city more than 2,000 years ago. The air feels warmer than you expect, almost heavy with the weight of memory. Somewhere beyond the docks, a lantern flickers in a scholar's hand. They don't know it yet, but they're building something that will define how humanity remembers knowledge itself. You probably won't survive this night, at least not in the literal sense. After all, we're talking about a civilization that's long since turned to dust. But for now, let's pretend you do. You walk those ancient streets barefoot, your sandals tucked under one arm, the marble still warm from the day's sun. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you do, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far across the world these little bedtime journeys travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The breeze off the Mediterranean has that lazy rhythm that makes your eyelids feel heavier by the minute. Alexandria isn't loud, it hums, not with shouting or cartwheels, but with the quiet hum of ambition. It's a city founded by Alexander the Great around 331 BCE, a man whose travel itinerary basically read, "Conquer everything before breakfast." He never lived to see this city become what it would, but his dream stuck around, tucked neatly between two worlds, the Egyptian and the Greek. You walk along the harbor's edge, the Pharos lighthouse gleaming in the distance, a giant torch standing guard over sailors and scholars alike. It's one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, though right now it's just another quiet glow in the dark. The waves slap lazily against the hulls of ships, each one carrying something precious: olives, spices, scrolls, and ideas. That's what Alexandria trades in most of all: ideas. The streets smell of seaweed and baked bread. You pass fishermen rolling up their nets, priests murmuring prayers to both Greek gods and Egyptian ones, and children chasing stray cats down alleyways. It's an odd mix of accents here: Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Phoenician, even some from far-off India. Alexandria, at this time, is the original world city, the beating heart of the Mediterranean's knowledge network. And you, the traveler, have stumbled right into it. Somewhere near the royal quarter, torchlight glints off smooth limestone. The palace complex stretches out like a dream, full of courtyards, gardens, and columned walkways that seem to go on forever. And nestled somewhere in that maze, though you wouldn't know it yet, is the seed of an idea that will soon grow into the greatest library the world has ever seen. But first, there's the sea, always the sea. Alexandria was chosen not just for its beauty, but for its access. Deep water for ships, open winds for trade, flat land for building, and maybe, just maybe, a little luck. Historians still argue whether Alexander himself picked this exact spot or one of his generals did later. But one thing's certain: it became a magnet for the brightest minds of the ancient world. You sit on a low wall by the docks and watch as a ship unloads crates of papyrus from the Nile Delta. The crew moves slowly, careful not to crush the rolls of writing material that the entire intellectual world depends on. Imagine: no paper factories, no printers, no copy-paste shortcuts. Every scroll here has been copied by hand, word for word, line by line. Somewhere, a scribe's wrist is cramping just thinking about it. A curious cat hops up beside you, tail flicking. In Alexandria, cats are half companions, half librarians. People feed them to keep the city's papyrus safe from mice. though the cats probably think of themselves as scholars, too. You scratch one behind the ear and it purrs like a quiet motor. As night deepens, the city seems to breathe slower. The sound of sandals fades, replaced by the occasional whisper from passing philosophers. You overhear fragments, something about Aristotle's lost works, or an argument over whether the Earth moves around the sun or vice versa. Historians still argue whether early Alexandrian astronomers actually figured that out before Copernicus, so let's just say they were suspiciously close. You walk further inland, toward the faint outline of the royal quarter. The streets widen, lit by oil lamps set into niches along the walls. In the shadows, statues of gods and heroes loom, their faces half hidden by ivy. You think you spot Alexander himself, stone eyes staring out toward the sea, his hand raised as if to say, "Keep looking forward." A guard at a bronze gate nods you through. He's bored, leaning on his spear. You can almost hear him mutter something like, "Another philosopher, probably," before turning back to his thoughts. You pass into a quiet courtyard. The air smells faintly of olive oil and ink. Somewhere nearby, the sound of a reed pen scratching against papyrus keeps rhythm with the chirp of night insects. It's not music exactly, but it has the same sleepy cadence. Here, in these late hours, Alexandria feels eternal. You can almost sense the blueprint of something monumental taking shape. The Ptolemaic dynasty, descended from one of Alexander's generals, will soon invest everything in this dream, the dream of collecting every piece of written knowledge in the known world. The plan sounds absurd, even a little egotistical, but then again, this is a city built by conquerors and dreamers. You'd expect nothing less. A scholar in a thin linen robe passes by, carrying a stack of scrolls under his arm. He mutters to himself in Greek, something about missing verses in Homer's Odyssey. He pauses at a fountain, takes a sip, and then disappears into a columned hall. You wonder if that hall might one day become the core of the great library, or if it already is in some unrecorded form. Historians still argue about that too. Some say the library began as a small royal collection. Others claim it started as part of a grander institution from the very beginning. Either way, the idea is already alive tonight, glowing softly under these torches. You lean against a pillar and let your mind drift. The air hums with potential, the sense that this city is on the verge of becoming more than just a port, more than just another royal capital. It's about to become humanity's first true repository of organized knowledge, a place where curiosity itself is sacred. You close your eyes and picture the scrolls stacked high, each one whispering something ancient, a spell, a recipe, a theory, a forgotten poem. Somewhere, someone is already planning how to collect them all, how to copy the wisdom of the world and store it here, in this city by the sea. The waves outside crash like punctuation marks to your thoughts. For a moment, you feel the faintest shiver of time moving around you. You're standing on the threshold of something monumental, though all you can hear is the gentle scrape of reeds and the soft lap of waves. The night air smells of salt and ink. Somewhere in the distance, the lighthouse sends another flash of light into the dark. Steady, rhythmic, reassuring. You take a deep breath. The sound of your own heartbeat almost syncs with it. And there, under the quiet sky of Alexandria, you feel a truth that has no date, no language, no empire. That knowledge, once shared, never truly sleeps. The sun rises slow and amber over the horizon, glinting off the water like molten glass. Alexandria wakes gently. You can almost hear it stretch, its marble bones creaking in the morning light. Fishermen push their boats back out to sea. Merchants roll open their stalls, and the soft clatter of bronze pans echoes down the colonnaded streets. You're still here, watching it all unfold. And the strange part? It already feels familiar, like you've been wandering these streets forever, though the city itself is barely a few decades old. Alexandria is young, but it carries itself like an ancient god, confident, luminous, slightly smug. Founded around 331 BCE by Alexander the Great, it was meant to be a perfect city. Grid-planned by the architect Dinocrates, it's all right angles and symmetry, a mathematician's daydream turned to stone. You can walk from the docks straight through to the royal quarter without ever losing your sense of direction. Every street is lined with colonnades to keep you shaded, and at every intersection, a breeze from the sea seems to follow you like a quiet friend. You trudge past freshly washed limestone walls, the kind that glow too brightly in the morning sun. The smell of bread from a nearby bakery lures you briefly off course, but you tell yourself you're only pausing to admire the city's architecture, not to buy breakfast. The baker knows that lie and smirks anyway. As you walk, you notice something remarkable. Alexandria hums with languages. Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, sometimes all within a few breaths. You hear someone quoting Homer, and just a few steps later, a priest reciting a hymn to Isis. It's as if the city has collected voices the same way it soon will collect books. You turn a corner into a wide boulevard lined with palm trees, their shadows slicing the sunlight into stripes across the marble pavement. The air smells faintly of sea salt and crushed herbs. Above you, balconies overflow with vines. Scholars live here, many of them invited or bribed by the Ptolemaic kings. They've come from Athens, Rhodes, Babylon, and even Persia, each carrying their own scrap of the world's knowledge. You can almost imagine a scholar unpacking a scroll from his travel bag and thinking, yes, this is where my words belong. Ptolemy I, the man who inherited Egypt after Alexander's death, is the real architect of this intellectual empire. He saw what Alexander had started, a city meant to be the crown of the Mediterranean, and decided to fill it with something even more powerful than armies, ideas. Under his rule, Alexandria becomes a magnet for philosophers, mathematicians, poets, astronomers, and, of course, the occasional fraud with a good beard and a loud opinion. You know the type. They existed long before comment sections. You find yourself wandering toward the royal district. The streets here are smoother, the buildings taller. The palace complex dominates the skyline, a sprawl of courtyards and halls overlooking the sea. Some say it covers a full quarter of the city. You can believe it. The place seems endless. Marble columns rise like white trees, their capitals carved with lotus blossoms. The scent of jasmine drifts from a nearby garden where slaves sweep fallen petals into neat piles. Everything is ordered here, precise, almost rehearsed. You stop near a reflecting pool. A group of philosophers debates nearby, their voices echoing softly off the marble. You can't understand every word, but you catch bits. Plato, Aristotle, the nature of the soul. One man gestures wildly, almost falling into the water, while the others nod with serene disinterest. You smile. Even in ancient times, philosophy looks exactly how you'd imagine. Passionate, confusing, and slightly ridiculous. Still, the passion is real. Alexandria is a city designed for brilliance, literally. Its grid system isn't just urban planning, it's symbolic. Knowledge here moves like water through canals, structured yet alive. Every building, every column, every statue seems to say, here thought matters. Even the marketplace feels intellectual. A fishmonger quotes geometry to justify his pricing. A perfume seller references Hippocrates to market her oils as balancing the humors. You roll your eyes, but it's strangely convincing. As the morning warms, the sound of construction rises, a rhythmic hammering, the shuffle of sandaled feet, the deep voices of foremen calling orders in Greek. Alexandria is still being built, piece by piece, and the plans are audacious. Near the palace, architects are already talking about adding lecture halls, gardens, and, whispered only in the right circles, a massive archive for collecting every written work in the known world. The dream is out there now, drifting like sea mist. You pass a stonemason's yard and pause to watch. Marble blocks lie in neat rows, half carved into columns and capitals. The workers are covered in dust, their faces streaked with sweat. One of them pauses to sharpen his chisel, and you notice something scratched into the stone beside him, a crude drawing of a ship carrying scrolls instead of sails. Maybe it's a joke, maybe it's prophecy. Either way, it makes you smile. Not far from here, you hear the faint sound of music, flutes and lyres blending with the chatter of the streets. A small procession passes by, young scholars carrying laurel wreaths, laughing too loudly for people supposedly devoted to wisdom. One of them drops a scroll, and another rushes to pick it up like it's a sacred relic. You wonder if that scroll will one day sit on a shelf in the great library, or if it already has, and you're hearing echoes from the future. Alexandria's harbor gleams beyond the rooftops, and in the distance, the pharaoh's lighthouse stands proud and defiant. At night, its fire can be seen for miles, some say more than 30 miles out to sea. It's not just a beacon for ships, but a metaphor, an ancient billboard screaming, "We are the light of knowledge." You can almost imagine an exhausted sailor seeing that glow and thinking, "Finally, civilization." You wander down toward the water again, tracing your steps through the rhythmic order of streets. Even in its busiest corners, Alexandria doesn't feel chaotic. There's a sense of deliberate calm, as if the city itself respects silence. You find a shaded spot near a fountain and sit for a while. The water burbles gently, a soft counterpoint to the distant cries of gulls. You can feel the rhythm of life here, a heartbeat powered by curiosity. A young boy nearby balances a papyrus roll on his head, pretending to be one of the royal librarians. His mother scolds him gently but smiles. Even the children here play with knowledge as if it were a toy. That's the kind of city this is, one where learning isn't confined to temples or palaces. It spills into the streets, into songs, into gossip. You take a deep breath. The air tastes of salt and baked clay. The morning heat is rising, shimmering over the rooftops. Somewhere in the palace, Ptolemy's advisors are drafting letters to Athens, to Babylon, to every kingdom that might have a book or a scroll worth copying. They're beginning to weave the world's stories together. It's an act of arrogance, perhaps, but also of beauty. To believe that human knowledge can be gathered, contained, preserved. That's the kind of hubris only dreamers have. And you, standing here among marble and sunlight, can feel it happening. You're not in a city of mere trade and politics anymore. You're in a living machine for learning, one designed not to conquer lands, but to conquer time. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of ink and oil lamps from somewhere deeper in the royal quarter. You close your eyes and listen. The city murmurs, steady and certain, the way only something truly alive can. And though the great library hasn't been built yet, you can already sense its presence, an invisible architecture taking shape in the minds of men and women who refuse to let knowledge drift away like smoke. Soon, those ideas will need a home. By the time the first true stones of the great library are laid, Alexandria hums like a living experiment. The streets that once echoed with builders and traders now carry the measured steps of philosophers and scribes. You're there again, watching history quietly unfold. Not the kind with battle cries or banners, but the kind that begins with a quill touching papyrus. The air smells faintly of crushed reeds, fresh ink, and ambition. A new idea is taking form. A house for every human thought worth keeping. The dream belongs officially to Ptolemy I, the former general who turned into a pharaoh. He has the military posture of someone who once conquered cities, but now he's decided to conquer knowledge instead. And honestly, that's a lot harder to store in warehouses. Still, he tries. With the advice of a former student of Aristotle named Demetrius of Phalerum, Ptolemy envisions something monumental, a library that will gather every written work on Earth. Greek plays, Egyptian temple scrolls, Babylonian star charts, obscure poetry from some guy in Cyprus who swore he invented metaphors. Everything. If it could be written, it would be copied, cataloged, and preserved right here in Alexandria. You walk through the palace quarter as masons measure out the foundations for what will become the Mausion, literally the Temple of the Muses. The great library will soon rise as part of it, a sprawling annex dedicated to study, translation, and sleepless nights over parchment. You pause beside a stack of unfinished limestone blocks and run your hand along the grain. It's warm under the Egyptian sun. Somewhere nearby, architects argue about how high the shelves should go. They probably don't agree. Historians still argue about that too. The design isn't recorded in detail, which somehow makes it feel more magical. Was it a single massive hall or a collection of smaller rooms linked by courtyards? Some say the library had lecture halls, gardens, reading rooms, and even dining spaces so scholars never had to leave. Others imagine it as a labyrinth of scroll-lined corridors where a dropped candle could turn centuries of work into smoke. Maybe both are true. You can almost hear the echoes of sandals brushing across stone, the creak of wooden shelves, the sigh of papyrus unrolling. In one corner, a group of laborers carries baskets of papyrus scrolls wrapped in linen. You watch as they're stacked carefully, each one tagged with a little clay seal. These aren't books in the modern sense. No bindings, no covers, just tight curls of papyrus tied with colored string. Each roll might contain a single work, a tragedy by Sophocles, a medical recipe by Hippocrates, or a list of astronomical observations copied from some forgotten Babylonian tablet. A single shelf could hold more stories than 100 modern libraries combined. And they aren't just collecting for the sake of beauty. The Ptolemies understand something profound. Knowledge is power, especially when you can translate it. Alexandria scholars will soon begin turning Egyptian, Persian, and Indian texts into Greek, the universal scholarly language of the time. Imagine the scale of that ambition. You're not just preserving wisdom, you're rewriting it so the entire world can understand. As you walk, a breeze drifts through the unfinished courtyard, carrying with it the smell of lotus blossoms from a nearby pool. The sound of chisels echoes against the marble. You pause to watch an artisan carve a statue of Athena, goddess of wisdom, her marble gaze serene and unblinking. It feels appropriate. Even the gods seem invested in this project. Nearby, a small group of scholars has gathered under a canopy, scrolls spread out on a low table. One of them, an older man with silver hair, holds a reed pen poised in midair. "If we copy every text," he murmurs, "what happens when two versions disagree?" His apprentice shrugs. "We keep both." The old man nods approvingly. "That's wisdom." You smile. Somewhere, future historians are still arguing about how that policy worked, but you admire the optimism. Ptolemy himself appears briefly, surrounded by advisors and guards. His robe glitters faintly in the sun, trimmed with gold thread. He stops to inspect the site, says something in Greek about wanting the library to rival the very temples of the gods. There's a pride in his voice, but also something gentler, a kind of faith that knowledge, unlike empires, can outlive its kings. You wonder if he ever imagined that centuries later, his dream would become both legend and tragedy. A group of dock workers arrives at the palace gates, carrying crates stamped with foreign seals. They've just returned from the harbor, where ships have been unloading goods all morning. But these particular crates aren't filled with spices or gold. They're filled with scrolls confiscated from merchant ships. It's part of the Ptolemy strategy. Every ship entering Alexandria must surrender its books for copying. The originals stay in the library. The copies go back to the owners. A polite way of saying, "Thanks, we'll take that." You can't help but grin. It's the ancient world's version of piracy, except somehow more organized and legal. By midday, the workers pause to rest. The courtyard grows quiet except for the chirping of cicadas. You find a shaded bench and sit down, watching dust float lazily through the sunbeams. For a moment, everything feels suspended: time, motion, thought. You imagine what this place will become when it's finished. Shelves stretching higher than you can reach, scrolls covering every subject imaginable: geometry, poetry, medicine, astronomy, recipes for ink, instructions for embalming, a love poem from someone long forgotten. The human mind, cataloged and rolled tight. A soft voice interrupts your daydream. A young woman with ink-stained fingers approaches, clutching a scroll to her chest. She's a scribe, one of many employed to copy texts for the library. Her name might be lost to history, but her work isn't. She sits near you, unrolls her papyrus, and begins to write in steady, careful strokes. The scratching of her reed pen is hypnotic. You can't help but lean closer, watching symbols take shape like tiny footprints in wet sand. After a while, she glances up. "They say this will never end," she whispers, "that every day more ships will bring more words. But how can anyone ever read them all?" You think about that for a moment. Then you smile and say softly, "Maybe it doesn't matter who reads them. It only matters that they're safe." She nods and returns to her work. By evening, the workers have gone home, leaving the half-built library bathed in the orange glow of sunset. You wander through the unfinished halls, listening to your own footsteps echo against the marble. In the distance, you can hear the sea, a constant, rhythmic pulse. The waves sound almost like the turning of pages. You pause before a row of empty niches that will one day hold scrolls. You imagine them filled, the air thick with the smell of papyrus and oil lamps. You can see scholars pacing, muttering in half a dozen languages, arguing about stars, atoms, gods, and geometry. You can hear the laughter of poets, the quiet sighs of exhausted copyists, the soft hum of thought that never stops. Historians still argue whether the Great Library was ever completed in the grand way the legends describe. Some say it began small and expanded over time. Others insist it was always colossal, its shelves overflowing from the start. But standing here, in the half-light of the Alexandrian dusk, you realize the truth doesn't really matter. The idea itself, the desire to gather, preserve, and share, was the foundation. The walls were just decoration. The first torch is lit, then another, and another. Soon the entire site glows like a constellation come to earth. The workers' shadows stretch long and soft across the ground. Somewhere, a scribe recites aloud as he copies a verse from Hesiod. Through work, men grow rich in flocks and wealth. Through work, they become much better loved. The words drift into the air, timeless and fragile. You take one last look around. The library isn't finished yet, but its spirit already hums through the city. the promise of centuries of learning, of questions yet to be asked, of human curiosity refusing to be quiet. Somewhere in the distance, the lighthouse flashes its beam again, guiding ships toward the harbor, toward knowledge, toward history. And for a moment, it feels like you're standing not just at Alexandria, but at the very heart of civilization itself. Morning light floods the harbor of Alexandria, catching on the sails of ships as they drift toward the docks. The city's heartbeat quickens, not with war drums or fanfare, but with the rhythm of trade. Olive oil from Crete, linen from Thebes, cedar wood from Lebanon, spices from far-off India. But if you look closely, you'll notice something else being unloaded. Bundles of papyrus, wooden chests full of scrolls, crates sealed with wax and labeled in strange alphabets. The great library's appetite has grown insatiable, and you, strolling along the docks, are about to witness its rather unsubtle feeding habits. A tall official in crisp linen stands at the pier, flanked by scribes holding tablets. Every incoming ship is stopped. "Welcome to Alexandria," he says, voice smooth as honey, but eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Your cargo will be inspected, especially any scrolls you might be carrying." It sounds polite, but you can tell it isn't optional. Sailors groan, merchants protest, and scribes eagerly roll up their sleeves. Within minutes, manuscripts are lifted from holds and cabins, their titles read aloud and logged into clay records. This, you realize, is how the library grows, one confiscated scroll at a time. The process is known among locals as the seizure of the books. Each captured text is sent to the copyist's wing of the museum. There, teams of scribes create an exact duplicate, working under flickering lamplight, their reed pens whispering across the papyrus. When the copies are done, they're returned to the ship owners, or so the officials claim. But the originals, those go straight to the library, stored carefully in the royal archives. The copies? Well, let's just say they might not always be of the highest quality. Bureaucracy hasn't changed much in 2,000 years. One sailor near you mutters something under his breath about intellectual theft. Another laughs. "At least the pharaoh pays in gold." The first shakes his head. Gold fades, words don't. You can't help but smile. In a city obsessed with eternity, even cynicism sounds poetic. As you follow the cartloads of scrolls deeper into Alexandria, the streets grow narrower, quieter. The scent of salt gives way to ink and beeswax. The great library looms ahead, its white columns now streaked slightly with soot from oil lamps, its halls alive with murmurs and footsteps. The air here feels thick, like breathing inside a dream made of words. You step inside and are immediately swallowed by sound. The rustle of papyrus, the echo of sandals, the low hum of voices reading aloud. Every corner seems to pulse with energy. You catch fragments of languages: Greek, Demotic Egyptian, Hebrew, even Persian. Translation is the lifeblood of this place. Scholars sit in circles, arguing softly over a single phrase or symbol, debating whether a Babylonian word for star might actually mean omen. Historians still argue whether the library truly had dedicated translation rooms, but you can imagine it easily. Rows of tables, piles of scrolls, and the eternal smell of warm ink. In the corner, a bearded man in a blue robe gestures dramatically, nearly knocking over his lamp. He's explaining to his students how ships at the harbor bring more knowledge each day. Each scroll a new universe, he declares. His students nod dutifully, though one looks like he might actually be asleep with his eyes open. You relate to him deeply. A scribe hurries past carrying a pile of newly seized manuscripts from a Phoenician merchant ship. He stops briefly to wipe the sweat from his brow, leaving a perfect ink fingerprint on his cheek. Another batch, he sighs. Astronomy, apparently. Though one looked suspiciously like a love poem disguised as a star chart. You chuckle. Humans haven't changed. We'll always find ways to sneak romance into everything, even math. You wander into a larger chamber where the ceiling disappears into shadow. Sunlight filters through small, high windows, dust motes swirling like lazy stars. Shelves of papyrus scrolls line the walls, hundreds, maybe thousands. The smell is warm and dry, like straw and resin. A few cats prowl lazily between the tables, clearly aware of their divine status. They keep the mice away, and in return, the scholars tolerate their arrogance. One leaps onto a desk and sits squarely atop a map of the Red Sea. The scholar at that table doesn't dare move him. At the far end of the room, a tall wooden board lists newly arrived texts. The titles are written in Greek, but you can make out a few. The Histories of Herodotus, On the Motions of the Heavens, Medical Recipes of Heliopolis, A Guide to Raising Pigeons for Messages. That last one catches your eye. Even in a temple of wisdom, there's room for pigeon enthusiasts. You grin to yourself. It's oddly comforting. Outside, the harbor continues its ritual. Every day, more ships. Every day, more scrolls. The library's collection now spans subjects you've never even heard of. Geometry, agriculture, astrology, philosophy, even cookbooks. There's a rumor among the staff that one section is dedicated entirely to culinary experiments gone wrong. You can almost picture an ancient food critic writing, "Too much garlic ruins even divine ambrosia." Still, not everyone in the city is thrilled about the seizures. Some merchants complain that Alexandria is becoming a thief with good handwriting. A few foreign scholars accuse the Ptolemies of hoarding knowledge for power. And honestly, they're not wrong. Ptolemy II, who now rules after his father's death, sees the library not just as a sanctuary of thought, but as a political weapon. If Egypt becomes the world's center of knowledge, every other kingdom will have to come here to learn. You can admire the logic, even if it's a bit manipulative. Historians still argue whether Ptolemy II's book seizure policy was as systematic as legend claims or just exaggerated over time. But here, watching carts of scrolls rumble through the palace gates, it feels very real. The library is expanding like a living organism, absorbing every scrap of writing it can find, digesting, categorizing, and storing it for eternity. Or at least, that's the plan. You wander back into the copyist's chamber, where dozens of scribes sit shoulder to shoulder, their reed pens scratching in sync. The room is quiet except for the sound of breathing and ink. Each table is lit by a small oil lamp, the flames trembling as if whispering secrets. A master scribe moves slowly between them, correcting posture, adjusting hands. "No smudges," he murmurs, "no errors. Remember, you're not just copying words, you're preserving the god's memory." It's poetic, but also slightly terrifying. The pressure must be immense. You spot one poor apprentice whose ink has spilled across half a page. He stares at it in despair, then quickly folds it over, muttering something that sounds suspiciously like an ancient swear word. You sympathize deeply. Mistakes happen, especially when your candle's been burning for 6 hours straight. Later, as the day cools, you step out into the courtyard again. The library's walls glow in the amber light of dusk. The harbor beyond is quiet now. The last ships have anchored, their sails folded like resting wings. Somewhere behind you, a chorus of voices begins reciting Homer aloud. It's almost musical. You sit by the fountain and listen as the words float upward into the violet sky. You think about what's happening here. Not just the copying of scrolls, but the merging of civilizations. Egyptian priests sharing astronomy with Greek mathematicians, Jewish scholars debating philosophy with Syrian poets, ideas flowing freely, at least for now. The library isn't just a building, it's a meeting place of worlds. You dip your fingers into the cool fountain water and watch the ripples spread. Every book taken from a ship, every word translated, every argument in a sun-drenched hallway, it all ripples outward. And maybe, just maybe, those ripples will reach far enough to touch the future. As night settles, the lamps inside the library burn once more. You can hear the distant sound of waves against the breakwater, a rhythm as old as the city itself. The scribes will work through the night. The scholars will argue through dinner. The cats will claim more tables. And above it all, the library keeps breathing, absorbing, remembering, never quite sleeping. You close your eyes, letting the sounds fade into a hum. The smell of papyrus, the soft glow of lamps, the rhythmic sigh of the sea. It all blurs together until you can't tell where history ends and dreaming begins. By the time you return to the library the next morning, the sunlight is sharp and white against the marble colonnades. The harbor smells of salt and figs. Traders are already arguing over copper ingots, and the streets are alive with the clatter of sandals and the rhythmic calls of vendors. But as you step through the library's tall bronze doors, the noise outside fades to a hush. Inside, it's another world entirely. A city within a city, pulsing not with trade, but with thought. A breeze moves through the long corridors, carrying the faint smell of oil lamps and ink. You notice that the scholars have already gathered in the courtyard, forming clusters beneath the shaded porticos. They look like a flock of birds, robes of white, blue, and sand-colored linen fluttering as they debate. One man waves a scroll in the air like a weapon. Another takes notes calmly, lips pursed in disapproval. You pause to listen. The topic, apparently, is whether numbers themselves have divine essence or are merely human inventions. To your surprise, the argument sounds less philosophical and more personal. The great library, you realize, isn't a serene temple of peace. It's full of quiet rivalries, intellectual duels that can stretch for years. Every scholar here believes they are contributing to the advancement of knowledge, but they also believe, deep down, that their view is the correct one. In a place devoted to truth, ego still finds plenty of room to grow. A young librarian passing by notices your curiosity. "Don't mind them," she says softly, balancing a tray of papyrus rolls. "They'll still be at it when the moon rises. Yesterday they argued about the shape of the earth for 6 hours. One of them fainted." You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. "Too much sun, not enough humility." She leads you down a corridor lined with carved reliefs, winged sphinxes, lotus blossoms, the image of Ptolemy himself offering scrolls to the goddess Athena. "This way," she says, "to the scholars' quarters." You follow, and as you walk, she tells you about some of the minds who live and work here. There's Callimachus, the poet and librarian who created the Panacus, an enormous catalog of every work housed within the library. It's a monumental task, tens of thousands of scrolls sorted by author, title, subject, and origin. Without him, she says, we'd be wandering blind. She gestures toward a large wooden board filled with names and numbers. That's just one section. Philosophy alone takes up 5 shelves of records. Farther down the hall, she points to a room echoing with the sound of laughter. "That's Aristophanes' classroom," she whispers. "The man who measured the earth using nothing but shadows." You peek inside and see an elderly scholar with kind eyes and a short beard drawing circles in the sand with a bronze rod. Around him, students scribble calculations onto wax tablets. He explains how, by comparing the angles of shadows cast in two cities on the same day, he can estimate the planet's circumference. You can feel the students' awe. They aren't watching a man, they're watching an idea take shape. Eratosthenes pauses, noticing you. "Traveler," he calls, "do you think the Earth is round?" You hesitate. "I think it's quite large," you reply carefully. He grins. "Good answer. Large enough to keep us humble." His students laugh, and you smile as you leave. Humility, it seems, is a recurring theme here, even if it's mostly aspirational. Not all the scholars are so genial. Down another corridor, you overhear a heated exchange between two astronomers arguing about the motion of the planets. One insists that everything revolves around the Earth. The other believes the sun might, in fact, be the center. The first man slams his palm on the table, rattling his ink pots. "Blasphemy!" he cries. "The heavens themselves prove our place at the center." The second scholar shakes his head slowly. "Perhaps the heavens prove nothing at all. Perhaps they only move." You slip away before they notice you, your thoughts lingering on their words. For all its tranquility, the library is full of tension between old and new, certainty and curiosity. It's a tension that drives progress, though it also occasionally drives men to madness. In one of the quieter wings, you find the mathematicians. Their tables are covered in chalk dust and geometric diagrams. Circles overlap triangles, equations wind like vines. A young man with a thin mustache is bent over his work, muttering to himself. He notices your shadow and looks up. "Ah, a visitor. Do you like numbers?" You admit that you tolerate them. He grins. They tolerate you too. You laugh despite yourself. His name is Archimedes, a visiting scholar from Syracuse. "I'm working on ways to move water uphill," he explains. "Not for glory, just so farmers can rest their backs for once." You nod, watching as he sketches a spiral tube. It's astonishingly simple and revolutionary. The library isn't just preserving knowledge, it's creating it. Later that day, you wander into the zoological section of the museum. The air smells faintly of straw and herbs. There are cages of exotic birds, jars of preserved creatures floating in clear liquid, and scrolls detailing dissections of fish, cats, and crocodiles. A physician named Herophilus is lecturing nearby, describing the pulse of the human heart in careful detail. Each beat, he says, is a rhythm of life itself. His apprentice takes notes so quickly that his reed pen squeaks. You look around, marveling at the blend of curiosity and reverence. These men are studying the human body not out of morbid fascination, but out of wonder. By afternoon, the library hums with energy. In the colonnade, poets recite their verses aloud while scribes transcribe them for the archives. A philosopher delivers a lecture on the nature of dreams to an audience of sleepy listeners. Somewhere deeper inside, you hear the faint clink of glass vessels. Alchemists experimenting with colors, perfumes, and early chemistry. The line between art and science is thin here. To the scholars of Alexandria, everything is worthy of study: stars, stones, stories, and souls. But the more you observe, the more you realize how fragile it all is. The scrolls may be stacked neatly, but the people who guard them are still human. They argue, compete, and sometimes sabotage each other's work. One evening, you overhear a poet complaining bitterly that another scholar has stolen his verses. He changed 2 words and claimed it his own, he fumes. 2 words! That's all it takes to rewrite history. You can't help but think of how easily memory shifts, how fragile even truth becomes when written on something as delicate as papyrus. Still, amid the rivalries, There's a strange sense of unity. The library is like a great living organism, and every scholar, no matter how proud or petty, is a part of it. At night, when the lamps burn low, the building hums with a shared devotion. You walk through the halls quietly, listening to the faint scratching of pens, the murmur of voices reciting lines from Homer or Aristotle. It's a kind of music, the symphony of a civilization thinking aloud. Outside, the stars shimmer above the harbor, reflected in the black surface of the sea. Somewhere, sailors are still unloading ships filled with new scrolls. The library grows one breath at a time, absorbing the world. Before you leave for the night, you pause at a balcony overlooking the courtyard. Below, scholars stroll between columns lit by flickering torches. A few are laughing, a few still arguing. You can smell the faint sweetness of crushed papyrus and oil lamps. It's a quiet scene, peaceful yet alive with meaning. You realize that these men and women, messy, brilliant, endlessly curious, are the true library. The scrolls are just vessels. The real treasure is the minds that gathered here, daring to ask questions no one else would. You take one last look at the halls, glowing golden in the lamplight. For now, the library stands eternal, its shelves heavy with the thoughts of the world. You can almost believe it will last forever. Almost. Morning drifts over Alexandria like honey, slow and golden. You wake to the distant cries of gulls and the rhythmic creak of ships docking in the harbor. The air carries that now familiar perfume of salt, smoke, and baked clay. You stretch, roll your shoulders, and remember where you are, in the most ambitious center of knowledge the ancient world has ever known. Today, your steps take you deeper into the Museum, the grand complex surrounding the library. If the library is its beating heart, the Museum is the living body, veins filled with scholars, instruments, and whispered experiments. You've heard it described as a temple to the Muses, the 9 divine patrons of art and learning. But in truth, it feels less like a temple and more like a university, a monastery, and a laboratory, all mashed together by a particularly ambitious god of curiosity. As you walk beneath its marble colonnades, the place hums with activity. You pass a courtyard where philosophers are arguing about the moral purpose of music. Around the corner, 2 astronomers balance a brass sphere between them, debating how to map the heavens more accurately. There's even a faint rhythmic tapping from the next hall, a mathematician testing a theory about musical harmony using pipes and water. One of the caretakers greets you warmly. "You're up early," he says, handing you a cup of watered wine. The Museum never truly sleeps, but the mornings are the best time to see it alive. Everyone's competing to be the first to make a discovery before lunch. You chuckle, sipping the cool drink. He's not joking. Competition here is almost sacred. You follow him past a row of doorways that open into rooms of scholars at work. Some are reading by lamplight, others are pacing, muttering formulas under their breath. The floors are strewn with papyrus scraps, the kind of mess that comes from too much thought and too little tidying. The caretaker explains that residents of the museum are not just librarians, they're researchers, poets, scientists, and teachers. They live here, eat here, argue here. Their meals are paid for by the royal treasury, courtesy of the Ptolemaic kings, who believe that sponsoring intellect gives their empire divine legitimacy. Some call it the first think tank, he says proudly. Others call it the largest collection of egos in human history. You soon see why. In one open hall, you spot a group of scholars mid-meal, seated on low couches around trays of bread, olives, and cheese. A heated debate crackles between bites. A poet insists that truth is born in rhythm. A philosopher retorts that truth cannot rhyme. A third man interrupts, "Gentlemen, truth is not born, it is uncovered." There's a pause, then laughter, and someone toasts to uncovering before biting into a fig. You linger near them for a while, eavesdropping on their arguments. It's mesmerizing to hear how thought flows here, half play, half discipline. Every topic, from geometry to the soul, is fair game. One man claims that dreams are messages from the gods, another that they're the random flickering of a resting brain. Historians still argue whether they were right about that, you think to yourself, smiling. Further down the hall, you step into what looks like a small laboratory. Clay jars line the shelves. Some are filled with sand, others with colored powders. There's a faint metallic smell in the air. Two scholars are bent over a brazier, carefully melting bits of metal to test different alloys. "We're not just thinkers here," one of them says without looking up. "We're tinkerers. The muses love dirty hands." You can't help but notice the gleam in their eyes, that spark that comes when curiosity turns into obsession. One man holds up a lump of bronze and says, "Imagine building something that could move on its own." His colleague laughs. "That's impossible." The first shrugs. "Perhaps, for now." You grin. A tiny seed of mechanical invention has just been planted, and neither of them knows it. As you move through the halls, you start to sense how the Mausoleum connects every kind of human thought. You pass a musician testing different lengths of flute pipe, recording how pitch changes with airflow. Across from him, a mathematician sketches sine curves in the sand. The two exchange a glance. Different disciplines, same melody. Knowledge overlaps everywhere here, and that's what makes it hum. By midday, you reach the dining court again. The tables are being cleared, and scholars drift into the shaded gardens behind the main hall. You follow them through a grove of fig trees, where benches are carved from pale limestone. Some sit alone, reading scrolls. Others walk in pairs, lost in conversation. The sound of a small fountain echoes softly, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the place. You sit beside a quiet man who's tracing letters in the dust with a reed stylus. He introduces himself as Apollonius of Rhodes, a poet revising his new epic. It's about Jason and the Argonauts, he says, but it's not really about them. It's about the journey, how knowledge always takes you somewhere you don't expect. You nod, and he chuckles. Of course, everyone here says that. Even the astronomers think they're writing poetry. He leans closer. You want to know the truth? The Mausoleum isn't just a place for learning. It's a refuge for restless minds. Out there, he gestures toward the city, the world wants certainty. Here, we live with questions. That line lingers in your head long after you leave him. Living with questions. It feels like the unofficial motto of the entire library. As the afternoon light shifts, you explore the upper halls, where the private rooms of senior scholars lie. Each chamber has a narrow bed, a small writing table, and shelves stacked with scrolls. Some walls are painted with scenes from Greek myth. Others are left plain, as if their owners cared only for thought. You catch a glimpse of Aristophanes again, asleep over a pile of notes. Someone has draped a cloak over his shoulders. Scholars might chase immortality through ideas, but they still need naps. Later, a librarian named Cleon offers to show you something few visitors see: the observatory atop the Mausoleum. You climb the spiral staircase, each step echoing faintly. When you emerge, the whole city spreads below you in golden haze. The Pharos lighthouse gleams on the horizon, and the sea flashes like polished metal. Cleon points toward a set of bronze instruments, armillary spheres, sighting tubes, and star charts. "Here we map the heavens," he says softly. "Every night we record what moves, what stays. We're trying to understand the order of it all." You look at the glittering dome of the sky and think how impossible that task must feel. Yet here, Impossibility seems more like an invitation. As the day wanes, a quiet ceremony begins in the courtyard below. Scholars gather around a small altar dedicated to the muses. There's no grand ritual, just offerings of flowers, a few words of gratitude, and a low hum of music. It's beautiful in its simplicity. The gods of wisdom are not begged here. They are thanked for allowing mortals to reach a little higher each day. Afterward, the courtyard fills with gentle laughter, the clink of cups, and the distant murmur of the sea. The Mauseon glows in the lamplight, alive with its own rhythm. You realize that what makes this place so powerful isn't just the scrolls or the instruments, it's the people, their endless hunger to know. Still, there's a whisper of fragility beneath it all. You catch snippets of rumor, tension in the royal court, budget cuts, jealous whispers that scholars are growing too proud. One scribe mutters that the gods grow envious of mortals who hoard too much wisdom. You can't tell if he's joking. As you make your way back to your room, you glance once more at the courtyard. The musicians have started playing again, a slow, winding melody that rises into the night. A cool breeze drifts through the columns, carrying the scent of sea salt and olive oil. The stars shimmer faintly above the domes and rooftops, like quiet eyes watching over a fragile dream. You close your eyes and imagine the muses themselves walking among the scholars, amused, perhaps, but proud. They've built something extraordinary here, not a monument of stone, but of thought, a place where knowledge breathes. And as you lie down to rest, you can't help but think that if the gods ever envied humans, this shared pursuit of understanding, this joy of curiosity, is probably why. The next morning in Alexandria begins not with bird song, but with the faint sound of scraping metal and murmured instructions. You follow it, bleary-eyed, down the hallways of the Museion, the marble still cool beneath your bare feet. The scent hits you first, sharp herbs, olive oil, and something faintly medicinal like crushed myrrh. You round a corner and step into a small, dimly lit chamber filled with physicians and philosophers. At the center, hunched over a marble table, stands Aristotratus. If the library is the brain of Alexandria, Aristotratus is one of its keenest nerves. He's a man with the air of quiet certainty, silver hair pulled back, eyes like lit coals. Around him, students cluster, their hands full of clay tablets and wax styluses. On the table before them lies a figure, not quite alive, not quite gone, a subject of anatomical study. The room hums with curiosity, reverence, and just a touch of discomfort. "Come closer," Aristotratus says without looking up. His voice is smooth, patient. "Don't be afraid. The body does not lie. It only reveals." You hesitate for a heartbeat, but step nearer. The air feels heavy, like the hush before a thunderstorm. He gestures toward a set of copper instruments, hooks, knives, and thin tubes that gleam faintly in the lamplight. "For centuries," he says, "men have guessed at how life moves within us. They've said it's the work of divine fire, or wind, or spirit. But we," he looks up now, eyes sharp, "we test, we measure, we see." You realize that you're witnessing one of the earliest attempts at anatomy based on observation, not myth. The scholars of the Mauseon are pushing the boundaries of what is acceptable, even lawful, in pursuit of truth. Herophilus and Erasistratus, the pioneers of medicine in this age, have permission from the Ptolemaic kings to study the human form in ways that others dare not. Historians still argue whether these studies were performed on the dead or the living, but one thing is clear: their findings will echo for centuries. Erasistratus traces a finger along the subject's chest, then turns to his students. "Here lies the heart," he says softly. "Not the seat of emotion, as poets claim, but the pump, the engine that drives the blood. One of the younger apprentices gasps. The older ones exchange glances. Yes, Erasistrus continues, it moves by force, not feeling. The veins are its rivers, the body its landscape. You can't help but admire the poetry of that. Even science sounds like verse when spoken in this place. He continues explaining how the body is a machine. Veins carry blood, nerves carry signals, and the brain, not the heart, governs thought. A student timidly raises a hand. But sir, if the brain rules, where do we find the soul? Erostratus pauses, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. Ah, he says, that question has kept philosophers in business longer than any king. Laughter ripples through the room, a small release from the tension. You notice a few students shift uncomfortably, torn between reverence and revulsion. Science, even in this enlightened age, still feels like sacrilege when it gets too close to the mysteries of life. You find yourself holding your breath as Erostratus picks up a hollow bronze tube and fits it over an artery. Listen, he murmurs. The pulse tells us the truth. You lean closer, hearing nothing but the faint echo of his words. Yet somehow you feel the same awe his students do. The dawning realization that the human body, so familiar, is also an undiscovered country. After the session, the scholars step outside into the bright courtyard, blinking like night creatures emerging into daylight. The conversation continues, more animated now, theories tumbling over one another. You walk beside them, absorbing fragments of talk about the liver's mysterious purpose, the pathways of the nerves, the invisible forces that make muscles move. Aristoratus joins you, wiping his hands with a linen cloth. He seems oddly serene for a man who spends his mornings staring into the machinery of life. You look pale, he remarks. You admit that the scene inside was intense. He chuckles softly. It is not the sight that unsettles you. It's the realization that the body is not magic, just matter arranged beautifully, and that means it can fail. The honesty in his voice makes you shiver a little. Do you ever feel, you ask, that you're trespassing into something sacred? He tilts his head, considering. Every day, he says, but ignorance is a greater sacrilege. If the gods wished us not to learn, they would not have given us curiosity. You nod, struck by the simple wisdom of it. The man who maps arteries like rivers also speaks like a philosopher. Maybe in Alexandria, those two roles are never far apart. Later, you wander through the medical wing, where other scholars are busy cataloging plants and minerals used for healing. Shelves overflow with jars, honey, ground herbs, dried lizards, even fragments of coral. One physician, Heraclides, grins as you peer into a jar of something murky and green. Crocodile dung, he explains proudly, mixed with olive oil, a fine sunscreen. You blink. Effective? He shrugs. Debatable, but it keeps the bugs away. You laugh, a much-needed reminder that even in the pursuit of knowledge, absurdity finds its place. At another table, a woman carefully records the effects of various herbs on wounds. Chamomile for swelling, pomegranate rind for bleeding, she murmurs. Aloe for burns, provided it hasn't gone sour. You notice how methodical she is, measuring doses, noting results. The beginnings of the scientific method, born right here among the papyrus rolls and pestles. By midday, the laboratory grows too warm, so you step outside to the shaded portico. There, a small group of scholars sit in a semicircle around a clay basin filled with water. They're tossing small bits of papyrus into it, watching how they float. We're studying circulation, one of them explains, the way currents form and fade. Perhaps the body works the same way. You smile, realizing how easily metaphor and experiment dance together here. Knowledge grows like a vine, twisting, adapting, always reaching for light. As the afternoon unfolds, you follow Aristotratus again to a quieter corner of the Museum, where he's recording his observations onto scrolls. He writes with deliberate precision, labeling each section of the body in both Greek and Egyptian. So others may learn, he says, long after we are dust. You ask if he worries that his discoveries might one day be forgotten. He pauses, the reed pen hovering. Everything is forgotten eventually, he says softly, but each truth, once spoken, changes the air a little. The world keeps breathing differently afterward. There's something haunting in that idea, that knowledge doesn't need to survive intact to matter. Even ashes can fertilize new growth. As dusk falls, the courtyard of the Mausean fills with the glow of lamps. Scholars gather to eat, talk, and debate. You sit near Aristotratus again as he listens to a younger philosopher describe the human soul as a flame that flickers between body and heaven. He doesn't interrupt, just smiles faintly, eyes reflecting the lamplight. When the discussion quiets, he murmurs, "Perhaps the soul is simply the body remembering itself." The table falls silent for a moment, not in agreement, but in respect. Later, as you walk back through the colonnades, the night air feels alive with whispers, words from philosophers, notes from poets, the faint echo of Aristotratus' voice describing veins and nerves as though they were threads of divine craftsmanship. You can almost feel the city itself breathing. Above you, the stars shimmer, scattered like silver dust. Somewhere out there, other worlds might exist, other bodies, other minds. But for now, in this moment, the mysteries of your own heartbeat feel vast enough. You close your eyes, the pulse in your wrist steady and sure, the same rhythm Aristotratus studied, the same proof of life he traced beneath his fingers. You imagine him smiling, whispering, "The body tells the truth." And perhaps it does. You step into a quieter corridor now, the air thicker with a sense of reverence. The chatter of scribes and the clatter of styluses fade behind you, replaced by the soft susurration of scrolls shifting slightly as the breeze from the harbor sneaks through the marble arches. This, you realize, is where the true heart of the library beats. Not in the copying rooms, but in the reading halls. You find yourself before a set of wooden doors left slightly ajar. Inside, sunlight slants in through narrow slits high above, falling across long wooden tables. A handful of readers sit there, heads bowed, faces faintly illuminated by the glow. No lamps are lit. The light of Alexandria itself, reflected off the pale stone, is enough. You ease into one of the carved seats. A papyrus lies open before you, smooth, surprisingly warm from the sun. You flatten it gently, careful not to disturb the faint ink lines dancing across its surface. The text is in Greek, maybe poetry, maybe philosophy. You squint at a line that begins with something about arete, virtue. The hall smells faintly of ink, salt, and parchment. The air hums with quiet concentration. Each reader here seems suspended between worlds, the physical one of dust and stone, and another entirely, conjured by words older than their grandfathers. You imagine it feels like time itself slows to the rhythm of their breathing. You notice that every scroll bears a tiny tag tied with linen thread. The tag is written in both Greek and Egyptian, part of an early cataloging system, you realize. Some scholars claim Callimachus, a poet-librarian, created the first great index here, Penakes, a sprawling catalog listing authors, works, and brief summaries. Historians still argue whether this was truly the first card catalog in history, but it certainly became the model for every library to follow. Imagine that! one man trying to bring order to the chaos of all recorded human thought. No pressure, right? At another table, two young men whisper to each other. One gestures animatedly toward a passage, the other nods solemnly. You suspect they're arguing about some line of Homer, or whether fire or water is the primary element. They'd probably still be arguing today if they knew people still can't decide which philosopher had it right. Further down the hall, a lone woman sits, her scrolls piled high. She is Egyptian, her linen dress folded neatly around her, hair braided tight. Most people forget that women studied here too. Not many, of course. Ancient academia wasn't exactly an equal opportunity employer, but a few managed to carve out space in this male-dominated world. Hypatia, the famous philosopher and mathematician, would walk these same halls centuries later. You wonder what she might have thought of this moment, this fragile calm before history inevitably tips into fire and ruin. Someone sneezes, startlingly loud. The entire hall flinches. You catch the briefest smirk from an older scholar nearby. Even 2,000 years ago, libraries were allergic to noise. As you shift in your seat, you notice how the light has changed. The sun has dipped lower, the beams longer, softer. Shadows spill like ink across the tables. You trace the edge of one, thinking about how many minds must have passed through this place. People came from Athens, Babylon, India, drawn by the promise that all knowledge could be gathered in one place. It was an audacious dream, really. Collect every scroll ever written. Build a single sanctuary where truth could live safely. You almost have to admire the hubris. One story claims the librarians demanded every ship entering the Alexandrian harbor surrender its books for copying. The originals were kept, the sailors got the copies back. It sounds almost unbelievable, yet it fits perfectly with the library's mission. If humanity had written it, Alexandria wanted it. Another rumor insists that even scrolls from faraway China might have passed through here, carried by traders long before anyone in the West knew where silk really came from. Historians still argue whether that's true or just another romantic exaggeration. But it's fun to imagine, isn't it? The idea that somewhere among these shelves, someone was puzzling over strange Eastern scripts, trying to guess their meaning, sipping watered wine while the Mediterranean breeze rustled the papyrus edges. You run a finger lightly along the table's surface, smooth, worn, warm. You can almost feel the ghostly pressure of centuries of elbows leaning there, of countless scrolls unfurled and refurled, of ink-stained fingers tapping as thoughts took shape. There's something comforting about it, this slow accumulation of attention. A nearby scribe clears his throat and begins to recite softly, testing the rhythm of a new translation. His voice echoes gently, like a lullaby. You catch fragments of words, something about stars, navigation, perhaps a lost traveler. The cadence is mesmerizing. For a moment, you imagine all these minds, past, present, and future, threaded together by the same simple curiosity. One quirky tidbit floats up from memory. Some scholars say that readers here used scrolls as makeshift pillows when the hours stretched too long. The papyrus was cool and stiff, but when you're reading Aristotle at 2 a.m. under a flickering oil lamp, comfort is relative. Maybe you do the same. One quirky tidbit floats up from memory. Some scholars say that readers here used scrolls as makeshift pillows when the hours stretched too long. The papyrus was cool and stiff, but when you're reading Aristotle at 2 a.m. under a flickering oil lamp, comfort is relative. Maybe you'd do the same. You lean back now, letting your eyes drift across the ceiling. Painted beams, faded gold stars. The patterns remind you of constellations, though not quite any you recognize. Maybe they're older ones, Egyptian perhaps, painted by artisans who believed that learning itself was a form of worship. The library, after all, wasn't just a storehouse, it was a temple to the muses. To study here was a sacred act. And you're part of it now, at least in imagination. You sit among the greatest thinkers of the ancient world, quietly breathing the same dusty air, listening to the whisper of scrolls. The hum of knowledge surrounds you, patient and eternal. You realize the noise of Alexandria outside, the shouting vendors, the braying donkeys, the clatter of ships, has faded entirely from your mind. Somewhere deep in the library, a bell chimes faintly. Not a harsh sound, more like the delicate tone of bronze struck with a reed. Maybe it marks the end of daylight reading hours, or maybe it just means someone discovered a new word worth celebrating. As the last of the sunlight fades, the room begins to glow with oil lamps. The flames are small and steady, flickering just enough to make the shadows dance. You watch the light catch on a golden ink pot, on the polished curve of a stylus, on the attentive face of a scholar lost in thought. You take a slow breath. The air smells faintly of olive oil, smoke, and age. The atmosphere has deepened, warmer now, almost sleepy. You can feel the day slipping into evening, the work of the mind giving way to the calm of reflection. You rise, careful not to scrape the chair across the floor. As you move toward the doorway, you glance back once more. The readers remain, still and serene, their faces soft in the lamplight. You think, perhaps, that this quiet communion is what the library was truly built for. Not conquest, not ambition, but peace. Out in the corridor again, the night air brushes cool against your skin. The stars over Alexandria are beginning to appear, small, shy lights scattered across a deepening sky. Somewhere beyond, the sea murmurs against the harbor walls. You walk slowly, mind drifting, still carrying the gentle rhythm of the reading hall within you. You wake to the muffled clatter of carts outside, the city slowly stirring beneath the pale light of dawn. The harbor smells of salt, fish, and the faintly sweet tang of imported spices. You pull on your sandals and wander toward the library, noticing how the streets are already alive. Merchants shouting, donkeys braying, children darting between legs. But as soon as you step through the bronze doors, the world outside dissolves. You are immediately enveloped by the hush of the reading halls, the soft whisper of scrolls, and the faint smell of beeswax from the oil lamps. This morning, your curiosity pulls you toward the natural history section, a wing often overlooked by casual visitors. Here, the library seems almost wild. Shelves sag under jars filled with preserved plants, fragments of insects, shells, and minerals. Some scrolls describe the lives of animals with poetic detail, the cleverness of the fox, the patience of the ibis, the strange migrations of fish that vanish and reappear across the seas. You trace a finger along the text of one papyrus that describes a starling's song in such minute detail you can almost hear it. Scholars of Alexandria loved to observe, to catalog, to classify. A young naturalist named Crates greets you with a small smile. "We are learning to understand life," he says, gesturing to a table cluttered with jars and sketches. "But some of it is perplexing. Did you know," he adds, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "that some people believe crocodiles never sleep?" You raise an eyebrow. Historians still argue whether that's just myth or a misreading of the creature's habits, he admits, but it's a useful cautionary tale. You chuckle quietly, imagining sleepless crocodiles prowling the Nile banks while scribes furiously copied scrolls nearby. Crates leads you to a small alcove where more exotic specimens are kept. A pair of parrots chatter in the corner, their vivid feathers startling against the muted tones of parchment and clay jars. One of them repeats a few syllables of Greek, mangled but recognizable. Crates explains that they were brought from India, part of the constant flow of knowledge and oddities that passes through Alexandria. We never know what might inspire a new idea, he says. He gestures to a scroll detailing the migratory patterns of birds from Ethiopia. Observation is the foundation of everything here. You wander further down the hall, past stacks of scrolls documenting agricultural techniques, medical recipes, and the properties of minerals. One scroll claims that powdered pearls can improve eyesight. Another insists that the heart, not the brain, is the seat of courage. You smile at the contradictions. Even in a city devoted to knowledge, uncertainty thrives. Historians still argue whether some of these claims were widely accepted or dismissed as fanciful. At a long table near the center of the room, several students and scholars debate quietly over a newly acquired text on astronomy. They lay out a map of the night sky on the floor, tracing lines between stars with their fingers, discussing planetary movements. One argues that Venus should be visible at a certain hour, while another insists it must be hidden behind the sun's glare. The discussion is meticulous and almost reverent. You notice that disagreement is not a failure here. It is fuel. The pursuit of knowledge thrives on questions more than answers. Nearby, a poet reads aloud from a fragment describing the seasonal behavior of fish in the Mediterranean. His voice is low and melodic, almost hypnotic. You can feel the words weaving themselves into the air, blending with the faint rustle of other readers and the occasional scratching of a stylus. The entire hall feels alive, pulsing with intellect and curiosity. You imagine the same words inspiring someone centuries later, long after the scrolls have faded or been lost. A peculiar detail catches your eye, a small jar labeled dried frog hearts for study. You suppress a laugh. The scholars here had an eye for the odd, for the details others might dismiss. Some claimed it was for medical research. Others suspected experimental magic. You glance around. No one seems to notice your amusement. Perhaps, you think, the line between science and curiosity was always a little blurry. As you move to the next table, a young scribe points to a scroll describing the reproductive habits of fish. Some believe these creatures carry messages from the gods, he says. Others say it's merely biology, he shrugs. Historians still argue which interpretation influenced early medicine more. You nod, amused by the same tension you've seen in astronomy and poetry, the overlap of observation and interpretation, fact and belief. The afternoon brings a subtle change. Sunlight filters through high windows, casting long, soft shadows. You wander to a small garden attached to the natural history wing. A few scholars are here, examining plants and herbs. Some crush leaves between their fingers, inhaling their scents. Others jot notes on how the soil affects growth. You kneel beside one woman, noticing her delicate script and careful observations. She studies a flower's curvature, muttering about sun exposure and water retention. The precision is almost obsessive. You sense that Alexandria is not just a city of scrolls, it is a city of attentiveness. A curious tradition appears in the corner. A scribe has placed a tiny clay model of a crocodile beside his notes, labeled "For Comparison." You grin. Observation, after all, often requires reminders that the world is messy and playful. Crates chuckles from across the garden. Sometimes the models are more helpful than the live specimens, he says. You nod. It seems practical and somehow profoundly human. As the day winds down, the scholars begin organizing their notes and specimens. Crates guides you back toward the main hall, explaining that many of these observations will be copied into larger compilations, some destined for the royal collection, others stored for local study. Every detail, no matter how seemingly trivial, is preserved, because in Alexandria, nothing is too small to matter. You pause at a high window overlooking the harbor. Ships glide in the late afternoon light, their sails catching the last gold of the sun. Merchants call, gulls wheel in lazy arcs above, and you realize the library draws life from the city just as the city draws life from it. Knowledge flows back and forth like the tide. Before leaving, you glance once more at a scroll describing the migration of birds, their routes marked carefully across papyrus. You think about the painstaking observations, the detailed records, the quiet hours of copying and measuring. It feels sacred, almost. And you realize that every small act, tracing a leaf, watching a star, recording a heartbeat, is part of a larger tapestry, one woven across time, across continents, across generations. The sun dips below the horizon. The warm golden light fades, replaced by a cooler twilight. Inside, the library grows quiet. You walk slowly down the corridor, savoring the lingering smells of papyrus, herbs, and ink. Somewhere in the distance, a scholar reads aloud a line about a bird in flight. The sound is soft, almost imperceptible, but it feels like the heartbeat of Alexandria itself. You step outside, the evening air carrying the scent of the sea. The stars begin to emerge, tentative and pale at first, then brighter. Somewhere in the harbor, a bell tolls. You pause, taking a deep breath. The library, the Mausian, the scholars, the scrolls, all of it hums quietly with life, a resonance that feels eternal, even though you know it won't last forever. Yet for now, you allow yourself to believe in its endurance, in the beauty of curiosity, in the patient rhythm of observation and thought. You feel it in your chest, a quiet warmth, the echo of so many minds who came before you, thinking, recording, imagining. The morning light drifts gently into the library, dust motes suspended like tiny stars above the long wooden tables. You move quietly, careful not to disturb the few scholars already seated, their heads bent low over scrolls. The air is heavy with the familiar scent of papyrus, oil lamps, and something almost floral, perhaps the residue of pressed herbs used in preservation. You realize that walking these halls in the early hours feels like entering a cathedral, a place where time stretches and the outside world holds little sway. Today, your curiosity carries you toward the geography section. Maps are rolled tightly, some bound with colored threads, others labeled with tiny wooden tags. You reach out and unfurrow one slowly. The papyrus crackles faintly under your fingers. The map depicts the Mediterranean, its coasts detailed with surprising precision, rivers snaking inland, mountains sketched with triangles, cities marked by dots and tiny symbols. Alexandria itself gleams as a star on the edge of the Nile Delta. You trace your finger along the coastline, imagining the countless traders and travelers who used these charts to navigate unfamiliar waters. Nearby, a scholar named Timosthenes is adjusting the placement of tiny figurines on a table-sized model of the Mediterranean. He explains that he is preparing a report for the Ptolemaic court, summarizing known ports, currents, and trade routes. Every merchant ship that sails, he murmurs, is carrying not only goods, but stories, ideas, and occasionally scrolls. We must understand where they go and what they bring. You notice how meticulous his hand is, moving each figurine with care, as if the Mediterranean itself were a delicate, living puzzle. Demosthenes pauses to point out a particularly unusual feature on one of the maps, a line of islands that doesn't appear anywhere else in his references. Some claim it's a mirage, he says. Others insist merchants have simply invented it. Historians still argue whether these islands existed at all or if imagination carried them across the waves. You lean in, tracing the line. It's easy to see why disputes would arise. The line is so precise, so confidently drawn. In Alexandria, even uncertainty is carefully documented. You wander farther down the hall, passing a table stacked with scrolls describing mountains, rivers, and deserts. Some are annotated with notes about climate, winds, rainfall, seasonal floods. One particularly curious detail mentions a river in India whose water is said to taste of honey. You chuckle at the image of a sailor sipping it and wondering whether the locals exaggerate. Yet the library preserves such accounts, not to mock them, but to record the full spectrum of human observation. Even the fantastical has a place here. A small group of scholars gather near a globe-like sphere mounted on a pedestal. One of them, a woman whose hair is pinned neatly, traces the curve of the sphere and explains how the Earth is round, using observations of the sun and stars to measure its circumference. Eratosthenes taught us that even the heavens can be measured, she says softly. We follow his work, expand it, and record it so others may see. You recall the shadow measurements he made long ago, the quiet brilliance of his calculations, and feel a strange kinship with these men and women continuing his legacy. As you move deeper into the section, the maps become more elaborate. Some depict trade networks, annotated with symbols for different commodities: olive oil, papyrus, wine, precious metals. Others show military campaigns, with lines marking troop movements and arrows indicating battles. The library, you realize, is not just preserving knowledge, but also power. The power to understand, to anticipate, to navigate. One scholar, adjusting a set of tiny models representing ships, pauses to explain something fascinating. The Ptolemies are keenly interested in navigation, he says. They want to know which ports are safe, which currents are treacherous, which winds favor trade. Some captains keep journals of these journeys. Others embellish for dramatic effect. We record both. Historians still argue which accounts are trustworthy. You smile. The eternal tension between truth and storytelling seems to have existed long before your time. A few tables away, another group experiments with celestial observation. They have created a simple armillary sphere to track the motion of stars and planets. One young astronomer adjusts the bronze rings, whispering calculations under his breath. His companion notes the positions on a scroll. Together, they are trying to reconcile theory with observation, to chart the heavens in a way that sailors, scholars, and kings can understand. You think of how small the globe seems from here, yet how vast their ambition is. The quiet of the morning is punctuated occasionally by soft laughter or a whispered debate. One scholar mutters about the unpredictable monsoon winds in India. Another counters with a tale of a trading ship delayed by pirates near Crete. You realize that the library is alive not only with the preservation of maps and scrolls, but also with the living knowledge of experience, the practical intelligence of observation, combined with the recorded wisdom of the past. Later, you are invited to watch a small demonstration. A mapmaker lays out several charts and explains how distances are calculated using stadia, how latitude and longitude can be estimated, and how the curvature of the Earth must be considered. You can almost hear the faint echo of Eratosthenes' measurements in his instructions, a continuity of thought stretching across generations. It is mesmerizing, the patience required, the meticulous care, the sheer audacity of imagining a world so vast that it could be measured with shadows, scrolls, and reason. By afternoon, the library feels like a living organism. Maps, scrolls, instruments, and observation all pulse together. You wander toward a corner where the walls are lined with sketches of mountains, rivers, and animals, some observational, some imagined. The juxtaposition is fascinating, the rigor of measurement beside flights of imagination. In Alexandria, even fantasy is treated as data to be recorded, questioned, and perhaps someday verified. A young scribe leans close to a scroll, murmuring about a particular gulf that shifts according to seasons. "We must be precise," he insists. "The seas are mercurial, just as the knowledge we gather must be exact." His tone is both serious and tender, as if the maps themselves deserve respect. You nod, thinking how rare it is in any age to see such devotion, such care for the act of knowing. As dusk falls, the sun slants through the windows, casting long golden lines across the tables. Scholars begin closing scrolls, securing instruments, and walking toward the courtyard. You pause, looking over the maps one last time. Ships, mountains, rivers, stars. Everything seems smaller, yet larger in a way you cannot fully describe. The library is a lens, a mirror, a vessel of comprehension. Its reach extends beyond the walls, across continents, and even into your own imagination. You step outside, the evening air carrying the faint scent of the sea, salt, and papyrus. The sky is painted in streaks of rose and gold, and in that quiet moment, you feel a rare connection to the generations of minds who studied, recorded, and dreamed here. The library is not just Alexandria. It is every thought ever captured, every question ever asked, every human yearning to understand the world. You pause, letting the twilight wash over you. Somewhere in the distance, a scholar reads aloud a fragment of a journey across the Mediterranean, the voice low and melodic, echoing faintly against the harbor. The sound is a reminder. Knowledge, observation, and wonder are never truly silent. They ripple outward, through time, carrying with them the pulse of discovery. For now, as the stars begin to appear, you allow yourself to linger in that resonance, feeling it in your chest, in your mind, in the quiet joy of being present in a place devoted entirely to curiosity. The next morning, a gentle wind carries the scent of the Mediterranean through the open arches of the Mausean. You follow the soft echo of footsteps along the marble floors, noticing how each hall seems to hum with a quiet energy that never fully rests. Today, your curiosity leads you toward the section dedicated to literature and philosophy, a place where the whispers of centuries seem almost audible, curling around the long wooden tables like smoke. You pause at the entrance, noting the sheer volume of scrolls stacked meticulously on shelves that reach the ceiling. Some are poetry, others dialogues of philosophers, histories of distant lands, even plays meant to be performed in grand theaters. The air smells faintly of old parchment and ink, mingled with the subtle aroma of olive oil from the lamps that illuminate the rooms. You pick a scroll at random and unfurl it slowly. Greek letters flow in neat, deliberate lines, a rhythm almost musical. You find yourself absorbed in the cadence, imagining a poet somewhere across the Mediterranean composing these very words, unaware they would someday rest in Alexandria. A scholar approaches, noticing your fascination. "We preserve voices here," he says softly, "not only of kings and generals, but of poets, thinkers, and dreamers. Even the smallest ideas, the quietest musings, find a home." He gestures toward a nearby shelf where fragments of Sappho's poetry are kept, tiny pieces of papyrus so delicate they could be blown away by a sneeze. You smile, thinking about how fragile brilliance can be. Historians still argue how much of her work truly survived, or whether the fragments we possess capture her original intent. You wander down a narrow aisle, past a group of students translating a dialogue of Plato. They debate the nature of justice in soft whispers, referencing other philosophers and sometimes glancing at astronomical observations to illustrate points about cosmic order. One student leans forward, murmuring, "Perhaps justice is not a rule, but a harmony, like the music of the spheres." You catch yourself smiling. Only in Alexandria would the stars, the mind, and the human heart be linked so seamlessly. Nearby, a poet reads aloud fragments of epic verse. The voice is low and steady, the words curling around the room. You notice the scribes copying quickly, their styluses scratching across wax tablets as if the very act of recording could preserve the rhythm of thought. One of the scribes, a young woman with finely braided hair, glances up and smiles at you. She points to a passage she is copying, a meditation on memory and time. You lean closer. The words speak of fleeting moments, of the impermanence of life. Yet here they are, alive in ink and papyrus. A particularly quirky detail catches your eye. A small clay figurine of a muse sits atop one shelf, holding a scroll and a lyre. Scholars pass by without notice, but you can't help but grin. In Alexandria, inspiration is literal, tangible, even decorative. The figure reminds you of the duality of the library, rigor and play, precision and whimsy. Some argue that such symbols encouraged creativity among scholars. Others dismiss them as mere ornaments. Historians still argue how much these small touches influenced intellectual life, but you appreciate the charm nonetheless. As the morning light shifts, you notice a philosopher teaching a group of students. His voice is calm, almost hypnotic, weaving through complex arguments about ethics, the soul, and the nature of reality. To think, he says softly, is to wander without end. And yet, it is the wandering that illuminates the path. One student leans forward, nodding, while another taps his stylus thoughtfully against the table. You realize that here, questioning is more sacred than answering. You drift to a corner where ancient historians have gathered. Scrolls of Herodotus, fragments of earlier annals, and records of distant empires are stacked in careful piles. A young scholar points to a description of the Nile and gestures toward the natural history section, explaining how geography, climate, and culture intertwine. To understand the world, he murmurs, one must trace not only the rivers, but the stories they carry. You think of the previous sections you have visited, maps, plants, animals, medical observations, and marvel at how knowledge here is integrated, a mosaic of human understanding. A subtle hum of conversation drifts from a nearby reading room. One scholar is arguing that poetry itself is a form of history, that the emotions captured in verse reveal truths often lost in official records. Another counters, insisting that philosophy must guide ethical conduct. You watch the debate, sensing the quiet joy of minds at work, balancing rigor with imagination. As midday approaches, a gentle commotion begins near the central table. A philosopher has just introduced a newly acquired scroll from India, filled with cosmological diagrams. The scholars gather, leaning over the text, tracing its lines with their fingers. Some symbols are unfamiliar, others surprisingly familiar. You overhear one student whisper, "Perhaps the gods speak differently in distant lands, yet the questions remain the same." You walk slowly among them, feeling the faint pull of inspiration. Alexandria is not just a repository, it is alive, a place where ideas breathe, collide, and merge. Every scroll, every inked line, every whispered debate contributes to a living tapestry of thought. You pause near the window, looking out over the harbor. The sun glints off the water, ships moving slowly across the horizon. Somewhere far away, a sailor is reading the stars to navigate. Here, scholars read words and maps, discovering the world through observation, analysis, and imagination. The parallels strike you. Different methods, same goal: understanding. A young poet approaches you quietly, holding a fragment of verse about time and memory. "Read this slowly," she whispers, "so the words sink in." You do, letting the cadence wash over you, feeling the soft tug of centuries pressing gently against your mind. The library is both archive and heartbeat, both place and consciousness. You are part of it, even briefly, as it shapes the flow of thought around you. By late afternoon, the hall grows warmer, the light softer, golden streaks illuminating the dust motes floating lazily in the air. Scholars begin to wrap up their work, scrolls rolled, styluses cleaned, notes stored. You linger a moment longer, watching the ebb and flow of knowledge, deliberate, patient, and endlessly curious. Every gesture, every motion, every careful note contributes to the enduring rhythm of the library. Finally, you step into the courtyard, the warm breeze brushing against your face. The smell of salt, ink, and old papyrus mingles in the air. Across the garden, a small group recites lines from an epic poem, their voices blending with the faint hum of the city beyond the walls. You take a slow breath, letting the sensation of time and thought wash over you. Alexandria, you realize, is not merely a place. It is a living conversation, an intricate symphony of ideas, observation, and imagination. Every scroll, every scholar, every whispered debate contributes to the echoing resonance of human curiosity. You linger in the courtyard, letting the sound of recitation, the scent of the sea, and the fading sunlight imprint themselves on your memory. The library waits, patient and eternal, a sanctuary of thought and wonder, and you, walking its halls, are a fleeting part of that endless pursuit, a witness to the quiet, persistent heartbeat of knowledge. The morning haze over Alexandria is soft and golden when you return to the library. The city outside is already alive. Merchants arranging their stalls, the faint bray of donkeys echoing down narrow streets, the smell of freshly baked bread mingling with the salt air. But once you pass through the massive bronze doors of the museum, the bustle of the world fades into a hushed reverence. Here, the only movement is measured, deliberate, filled with purpose. Today, you drift toward the section devoted to mathematics and engineering, a wing that feels quietly mechanical, humming with the precision of thought. The air smells faintly of wax, chalk, and the dust of papyrus. Long tables hold models of gears, pulleys, and sundials. Instruments gleam faintly in the morning sun. You notice scholars bent over scrolls filled with diagrams and calculations, some cross-referencing with astronomical observations, others measuring distances on tiny scaled maps. Even the faint sound of scratching styluses is almost musical, a soft rhythm that seems to pulse with the heartbeat of knowledge itself. At a central table, an engineer named Archimedes, or perhaps a contemporary inspired by his work, demonstrates a small water screw. He turns the handle slowly, showing how water moves upward along the spiral. This simple device, he explains, can irrigate fields far from the river. Observe the principle. Imagine the applications. You lean closer, fascinated by the elegance of motion and mechanics. There's something hypnotic about watching a simple, clever solution in action, and something calming, too, in its predictability. Historians still argue whether these devices were widely used in Ptolemaic Egypt or remained mostly theoretical. Nearby, a student adjusts a scale model of a catapult, carefully noting the angles and weights required to achieve maximum range. You suppress a chuckle at the thought that engineers of the time were simultaneously constructing bridges of thought and machines of war. The duality seems oddly appropriate for Alexandria, a city that nurtures the mind yet thrives amid political intrigue. A small group gathers around a mathematical treatise. You notice diagrams showing geometric proofs, calculations of pi, and complex ratios for constructing buildings and temples. One young scholar whispers to another about how the formulas might be applied to architecture, while another sketches a design for a bridge over a shallow canal. The mix of theory and practical application feels seamless here. You marvel at how the library fosters both abstraction and tangible ingenuity. A quirky detail captures your attention. A tiny mechanical bird, perched on the edge of a table, constructed from bronze and tiny gears. It flaps its wings when a hidden mechanism is triggered. The students nearby laugh softly, delighted by the simple ingenuity. In Alexandria, play and invention coexist with rigor, a reminder that curiosity need not always be solemn. Further down the hall, a scholar examines a large diagram of the heavens, superimposing mathematical calculations over star positions. The armillary sphere beside him rotates slowly, tracing the paths of planets. You note the delicate precision of the spheres and instruments, each meticulously crafted to measure, predict, and understand. Observations here are not just theoretical, they are meticulously recorded, providing a foundation for generations to come. Historians still argue how accurate these devices were in practice, but the ambition behind them is undeniable. You move to a quieter alcove, where a mathematician is mapping ratios of musical notes, exploring harmonics. You watch as he hums softly, adjusting strings on a small lyre to align with his calculations. The intersection of math and music is hypnotic, a gentle reminder that science and art often spring from the same impulse, the desire to discern order in the world. Across the hall, a group studies simple machines, levers, pulleys, inclined planes. Each scholar tests principles repeatedly, observing friction, tension, and balance. You notice the patience in their movements, the careful attention to error and adjustment. Even a minor miscalculation is an opportunity for learning, a small step toward a more complete understanding of the world. You pause near a shelf filled with papyrus scrolls documenting practical engineering advice. Instructions for building aqueducts, maintaining irrigation systems, and constructing temples are carefully preserved. The texts blend empirical observation with imagination, and you sense the pride scholars take in recording knowledge that has practical application beyond these walls. Some of the scrolls even describe automata, mechanical devices that mimic living creatures, powered by water, wind, or hidden weights. You picture them quietly humming to life, small miracles in a world dominated by human labor and natural forces. As the day stretches on, the sunlight slants through high windows, illuminating the hall in soft golden lines. You follow a scholar as he tests the trajectory of a small model boat along a shallow trough of water. Observing how it moves in response to currents and waves, he makes careful notes. Every detail, no matter how small, is preserved. You feel a profound sense of patience and reverence, a rhythm to discovery that is both gentle and persistent. Later, in a quiet corner, you observe a student calculating the volume of a cylinder by pouring water into a precisely carved vessel. You realize that what seems like mundane measurement is actually a bridge to understanding the world itself, a way to grasp the infinite in finite terms. Somewhere across the library, another scholar traces the motion of stars with a stylus, connecting patterns and proportions that guide sailors, mathematicians, and poets alike. By late afternoon, the hall grows quieter. Scholars begin rolling up scrolls, securing instruments, and discussing discoveries in low tones. You linger, letting the stillness settle over you. The air is warm, heavy with the scent of wax and papyrus, and you feel the pulse of generations of thought reverberating gently through the space. You step toward the large arched windows and gaze out over the harbor. The sun glints off the water, ships moving slowly across the horizon. Somewhere, a sailor traces the stars to navigate, while within these walls, scholars trace principles of motion, measure distances, and calculate ratios. Different methods, same ambition: understanding the world. As the evening deepens, you leave the wing, carrying with you the quiet joy of witnessing thought in motion, the delicate rhythm of calculation, observation, and imagination. Alexandria hums softly beyond the doors, but inside, knowledge continues to pulse with an almost tangible heartbeat. The library feels different as evening approaches. The sun, now low in the sky, casts long amber streaks through the tall windows, illuminating motes of dust that float lazily in the warm air. The quiet hum of study has shifted into something more contemplative, a slower rhythm as the scholars pause to reflect on what they have absorbed during the day. You wander through the halls, following the scent of ink, parchment, and a faint hint of honey from beeswax seals used to secure precious scrolls. There is a sense of gentle closure, as if the library itself is preparing to exhale before the night fully descends. Today, your curiosity draws you to the philosophy and mathematics intersection, where logic meets imagination. A group of scholars is seated around a large table, deep in debate. Scrolls are unrolled before them, some filled with geometric proofs, others with philosophical musings. They argue quietly, their voices a soft murmur that mixes with the occasional scratch of a stylus on wax. You pause to observe a discussion about the nature of infinity, how a line might stretch endlessly, yet be divided into measurable segments. One scholar gestures toward a diagram of nested triangles, explaining how space can be both finite and infinite depending on perspective. Historians still argue whether this was merely theoretical or inspired practical applications, but the thoughtfulness in their voices makes you feel as if you are witnessing the very shaping of abstract reasoning. Nearby, a young student traces the path of planets across a parchment chart, comparing celestial patterns to mathematical formulas. His fingers follow arcs and ellipses with precision, noting discrepancies between predicted and observed positions. Another scholar, older and more experienced, points out corrections, citing Eratosthenes and Hipparchus. You watch as the student's face lights with understanding, a subtle smile forming as he realizes the elegance of combining observation with calculation. There's a beauty here, a quiet satisfaction in discovery, a shared excitement that doesn't need loud voices to be felt. A small, quirky detail catches your eye. A jar filled with tiny bronze spheres labeled Planetary Models Motion Study. When rolled along grooves in a miniature wooden system, they mimic the movements of planets around the sun. You can't help but grin at the ingenuity. The scholars here, you realize, love to experiment as much as they love to observe. Some insist the models are more reliable than textual descriptions. Others argue they are artistic representations meant to inspire thought. Historians still argue how accurate these early planetary models truly were, but you admire the combination of imagination and precision. You drift toward a set of tables where philosophers debate ethical dilemmas using geometrical analogies. One argues that virtue can be measured as carefully as a line, its perfection approached but never fully reached. Another insists that life's complexities resist such neat measurement, that understanding requires judgment as much as calculation. The interplay between reason and intuition, logic and creativity, feels mesmerizing. You notice that in Alexandria, these distinctions are not conflicts but complement each other, each feeding the other in a delicate dance of thought. A poet sits quietly in the corner, reading aloud from a fragment of verse about the stars and human ambition. His voice is soft, almost hypnotic, weaving through the gentle clatter of styluses and the occasional sigh of a scholar deep in thought. You find yourself drawn to the cadence of the words, the way they echo the themes of measurement, observation, and wonder you've seen in both mathematics and philosophy. Even abstract equations here seem to hum with the poetry of the universe, a rhythm you can almost feel in your chest. Further down the hall, a group of astronomers aligns their instruments, measuring angles and noting shifts in the night sky. One scholar adjusts a small armillary sphere, carefully comparing its rotations to the motion of the planets. Another takes detailed notes, cross-referencing with star charts and historical observations. You lean in to watch, captivated by the precision, patience, and quiet joy of discovery. Even the tiniest misalignment is noted and corrected, a gentle reminder that knowledge is as much about persistence as brilliance. A few shelves over, scrolls describe the lives of scholars from distant lands. Some recount mathematical discoveries in India or observations of stars from Babylon. Others detail philosophical debates in Athens or distant Egyptian temples. You trace your fingers lightly over the papyrus, feeling the connections that stretch across continents and centuries. The library is more than a building. It is a network of thought, a living archive of curiosity. Each scroll a thread in a vast tapestry of human understanding. As the sun dips lower, shadows lengthen, and the air cools, you notice a subtle hush descending over the library. Scholars pause, eyes lifted to the windows, tracing the fading light as it plays across columns and tables. A gentle stillness settles, punctuated by the soft turning of scrolls and the occasional murmur of a student summarizing an observation. You breathe in slowly, letting the quiet rhythm of study, reflection, and contemplation wash over you. A peculiar, almost whimsical moment catches your attention. A student places a small model of a bird atop a globe, watching it balance precariously. The room hums softly with amusement, a reminder that even in the pursuit of serious thought, there is room for play. You smile, realizing that curiosity and delight have always gone hand in hand. By evening, the tables begin to empty. Scholars gather their scrolls, instruments, and notes, speaking in low tones about discoveries, hypotheses, and observations. The library does not close. Its knowledge remains, waiting patiently for the next day, the next student, the next thought. You linger a moment longer, letting the lingering warmth of the setting sun illuminate the maps, instruments, and scrolls one last time. As you step into the courtyard, the evening air feels gentle against your skin. The harbor glows faintly in the twilight. Ships moving slowly, their sails catching the last colors of the day. Somewhere, a distant bell tolls, punctuating the soft chorus of waves, voices, and rustling parchment. You take a deep breath, feeling the library's quiet pulse in your chest, a rhythm of thought, observation, and imagination stretching across centuries. Alexandria is not merely a place. It is a living conversation, an intricate symphony of human curiosity and understanding. and you, walking its halls, are a transient witness to its gentle heartbeat, absorbing the echoes of knowledge, the whispers of ideas, and the playful experiments that make discovery so endlessly compelling. The morning air carries the faint tang of the sea as you return once more to the library. The streets outside are lively, full of merchants, travelers, and the occasional stray cat weaving between sandals and stone. But as soon as you pass through the bronze doors, the city's chaos falls away, leaving only the gentle, constant pulse of knowledge. You feel almost cocooned in this quiet rhythm, the smell of parchment, ink, and sun-warmed stone embracing you. Today, your steps guide you to the medical and scientific section, a wing devoted to understanding the human body, health, and the natural forces that shape life. The tables here are laden with scrolls, jars, and instruments. Some jars hold herbs neatly labeled in Greek and Egyptian. Others contain powders, tinctures, or preserved specimens. You catch the faintest scent of dried frankincense and myrrh mingling with the warmer, earthy aroma of papyrus. Scholars bend over their work, making careful notations, testing observations, and debating interpretations in soft, thoughtful tones. You notice that the work here is meticulous, patient, and almost reverential, a recognition that the human body is both fragile and wondrous. A young physician, carefully arranging herbs on a small table, notices you observing. "We study not just illness, but life itself," he murmurs. "Every plant, every substance, every recorded symptom teaches us something." He picks up a scroll describing treatments for fevers and small injuries. Some remedies are simple, others curious, he adds with a wry smile. One particularly odd detail mentions the use of powdered crocodile teeth as a supposed cure for headaches. You suppress a quiet laugh, recalling previous peculiar remedies in other parts of the library. Historians still argue whether such treatments were widely practiced or merely recorded for completeness, but the curiosity behind them is undeniable. You wander to a long table where several scholars are dissecting anatomical diagrams. You watch as they trace lines on papyrus, annotating the functions of muscles, the flow of blood, the position of organs. One scholar points out that the heart, not the brain, is the seat of thought and emotion, a belief still debated among contemporary physicians of Alexandria. You lean closer, fascinated by how knowledge grows incrementally, sometimes embracing myth and observation side by side until clarity emerges over generations. Nearby, a small group experiments with simple instruments, water clocks, balances, and scales, attempting to measure bodily functions or create precise medicinal doses. You notice the concentration etched on their faces, the patience of repeated measurement, adjustment, and recording. Some devices are surprisingly sophisticated, a testament to the ingenuity of the human mind. You imagine the quiet satisfaction of a successful calibration, a small triumph in the slow rhythm of scientific inquiry. A particularly playful detail catches your eye. A tiny clay frog with markings on its limbs rests on one scholar's desk. It is used as a teaching tool to demonstrate joint movement and anatomy. You smile at the thought that even the most rigorous study here is complemented by touches of whimsy, reminders that curiosity thrives when paired with imagination. Further down the hall, a group examines papyrus scrolls detailing rare diseases and herbal treatments. They debate whether certain symptoms are contagious or hereditary, whether environmental factors play a role, and how diet can influence health. One scholar murmurs, "Observation is our only guide, but interpretation is equally vital." The debate is quiet, respectful, and infused with a shared reverence for human life. Historians still argue how much of this early medical knowledge was actually practiced or remained theoretical, but the effort to understand, record, and refine is undeniable. You pause by a cabinet of curiosities, shells, bones, and preserved organs carefully labeled with meticulous handwriting. One jar contains a dried human heart, another, fragments of animal skeletons used for comparative anatomy. A scholar nearby traces the lines of a vertebra with a stylus, murmuring about structural similarities between species. The attention to detail, the patient observation, is hypnotic. As afternoon fades into evening, the light changes once more. Sunlight slants in through the high windows, illuminating dust motes that dance like tiny stars. Scholars begin to wind down, carefully rolling up scrolls, securing jars, and discussing findings in hushed tones. The quiet hum of curiosity lingers, a testament to the continuous effort of understanding the body and life itself. You step toward a window overlooking the harbor, watching ships glide slowly across the water, their sails catching the last gold of sunlight. Somewhere, a sailor might be calculating tides or winds to navigate, while here, inside the library, scholars calculate pulses, weights, and measurements to grasp the workings of life. Different methods, same purpose, understanding the forces that shape existence. You take a slow breath, letting the calm rhythm of study, observation, and reflection wash over you. The library, in its serene and meticulous way, embodies humanity's patient pursuit of knowledge. Each scroll, each jar, each careful measurement contributes to a tapestry of understanding that spans cultures, continents, and centuries. As the evening deepens, the air cools, carrying the faint brine of the Mediterranean. You feel a quiet connection to all the generations who have walked these halls, observed, recorded, and dreamed. Alexandria is not just a place of learning. It is a sanctuary of curiosity, a living testament to humanity's desire to understand itself and the world. The library is quiet now, bathed in the soft glow of twilight filtering through the tall windows. The day's activity has slowed, leaving only the faint rustle of scrolls, the occasional soft cough, and the whisper of scholars reviewing their notes. You wander slowly, absorbing the calm, reflecting on all the sections you've explored, the maps and models, the mathematics and astronomy, the natural history, and the delicate intersection of philosophy and literature. It feels as if every corridor, every table, every scroll is holding its breath, waiting for tomorrow to bring new eyes, new questions, and new insights. Your steps guide you toward the archives, where the oldest scrolls are kept. Papyrus fragments from distant lands, some brittle, some surprisingly intact, are carefully stored in wooden boxes lined with soft linen. You handle one gingerly, tracing faded letters with your fingers. There is a strange intimacy in reading words written centuries ago, a silent conversation between past and present. A scholar nearby murmurs about the difficulty of translation, noting that language evolves and meaning sometimes slips between generations. Historians still argue how accurately we can interpret these ancient texts, but in this quiet room, the effort itself feels sacred. You notice a small alcove where medical and botanical scrolls are carefully arranged, their pages illustrating plants, animals, and human anatomy. One jar contains dried leaves from a distant forest, another a tiny preserved lizard, its limbs curled as if asleep. You can't help but smile at the meticulous care, the sense that every observation, no matter how small or seemingly trivial, might someday illuminate some mystery of the world. Curiosity, you realize, is never satisfied with half measures. In a corner, a scholar reads aloud a fragment of Aristotle's natural philosophy, his voice low and steady, weaving through the soft hum of the room. You settle nearby, letting the rhythm of the words settle in your mind. The arguments are subtle, the logic delicate, yet each idea resonates. There is a feeling of connectedness here, a sense that thought, carefully recorded and preserved, can ripple across time, influencing minds far beyond the walls of Alexandria. A tiny clay cat sits atop a stack of scrolls, apparently guarding the manuscripts. You chuckle quietly. In a city devoted to knowledge, even the smallest gestures of whimsy are preserved alongside the most profound discoveries. Scholars argue over practical use versus inspiration, but you sense that both coexist here naturally, as if curiosity demands balance between rigor and delight. As dusk deepens, you wander toward the reading halls one last time. The light is soft, turning parchment golden, highlighting dust motes that float lazily in the air. A scholar sketches a diagram of a river delta, while another measures the angle of a small sundial. Everything is deliberate, precise, and gentle, a testament to the patient rhythm of observation and recording. You pause to take it all in, feeling the quiet heartbeat of human effort, of curiosity and imagination intertwined. The courtyard calls, and you step outside. The evening air is cooler now, carrying the scent of the Mediterranean and the soft murmur of distant waves. Ships drift slowly across the harbor, their sails glowing faintly in the twilight. Somewhere, a bell tolls softly, marking the transition from day to night. You feel the library's energy stretching beyond its walls, echoing in the city, the harbor, the streets. A reminder that knowledge is never confined, that it moves, breathes, and touches lives in subtle ways. You take a slow, deep breath and reflect on all you have seen: the diligent scribes, the curious scholars, the models, the scrolls, and the instruments. Alexandria was more than a building. It was a living testament to the human desire to understand, to preserve, and to imagine. Every question asked, every observation recorded, every odd experiment conducted contributed to a tapestry that stretched across time. The library was patience made tangible, curiosity made visible, and wonder made eternal. The stars begin to emerge, faint at first, then sharper as night deepens. Somewhere, a scholar traces their paths on a globe, calculating, imagining, predicting. Somewhere else, a poet murmurs lines of verse about the world, the mind, and the heart. You pause, letting the soft cadence of thought, observation, and imagination wash over you. The library hums quietly, even in absence of motion, even as the day ends. And now it is time to rest. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of knowledge, the gentle rhythm of discovery, and the soft echo of centuries lull you. The scrolls, the instruments, the models, the observations, they all remain, patient and enduring, awaiting tomorrow. You feel the calm settle deep into your chest, a gentle reassurance that human curiosity, like the stars above, continues on its endless, quiet journey. Slowly, you let your mind drift, imagining Alexandria's halls bathed in moonlight, the faint scratching of styluses, the soft rustle of papyrus, the quiet murmurs of scholars still engaged in thought. Every observation, every tiny note, every playful experiment adds to the pulse of the library. The world outside may rush and roar, but here, in the heart of Alexandria, time is measured in curiosity, patience, and wonder. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Feel the calm wash over you, soft and steady, carrying you gently toward sleep, wrapped in the echoes of minds long past but never forgotten. As night settles over Alexandria, the library takes on a quieter, almost ethereal presence. The sun has vanished, leaving only a gentle twilight that pools softly across the marble floors and wooden tables. You feel the gentle hush of the halls, the soft scent of ink and papyrus, and the warmth of countless hours of human attention lingering in the air. There is a comforting rhythm here, steady and unhurried, inviting you to breathe slowly and release the tension of the day. You imagine the scrolls resting in their shelves, the instruments lying patiently on their tables, and the scholars finally pausing to close their notes. Everything is still, yet alive, a reminder that knowledge, curiosity, and wonder are eternal. Each fragment, each careful observation, each playful model or experiment has contributed to a gentle symphony of thought that extends far beyond these walls, touching centuries yet to come. You take one last slow breath, feeling the rhythm of Alexandria's heart. The calm is contagious, wrapping around you like a soft blanket, carrying the gentle reassurance that learning, observing, and imagining are timeless companions. The stars outside begin to glimmer, distant yet familiar, silent witnesses to centuries of human curiosity. You imagine a quiet scholar tracing their paths, a poet whispering lines of verse, and a scribe carefully preserving the day's work. As you settle into your own quiet space, allow the gentle echo of the library to accompany you, letting each thought, each observation, each whisper of wonder lull you toward rest. The knowledge preserved here, the patience and care of countless minds, forms a soft, steady rhythm, carrying you slowly, gently into sleep. Let your mind drift with it, calm and untroubled, knowing that curiosity endures, imagination persists, and the heartbeat of Alexandria continues softly in the quiet of the night. Sweet dreams.